Thank you, everyone, for coming to our presentation. This is one of the last sessions on the last day, so thank you for sticking it out with us. So either you guys missed your flight, or you guys love governance.
Yeah.
Hope it's the latter, okay? So, good afternoon. My name is Anna Erickson. I am a principal architect for Providence, and this is Janet Vickers. She's a senior principal architect at Providence, and we work for the healthcare intelligence team, which is the enterprise data team, and we provide foundational data sets, data platforms, and data tools for all of Providence. Today we're going to talk about our experience migrating to Unity Catalog. But before I begin, I want to also call out two very integral team players and part of our team. We would not have been able to do this without them. We have Satish Marapelli. Please stand up, turn around and wave. He's our platform admin. He does the button pushing, okay? We just design. We're solutioning, but this is where the rubber meets the road. And we have another senior principal architect, Lawrence Yap. Stand up, Lawrence. Turn around and wave. Yeah. I kind of call him my mentor, too, because he helps me a lot with stuff. So I want to give him some props, okay? All right. So right here, we have some just high-level statistics on Providence. The biggest call-out is that we are a large-size, not-for-profit healthcare organization. We span 7 states in the U.S., and we have 51 hospitals and 1,000 outpatient clinics, and we have 122,000 caregivers, including the back office staff like myself and Janet here. In the past few years, we've been focusing on migrating our on-premises systems and platforms and moving them into the cloud. Our cloud provider is Microsoft Azure, and some other key data that we have is stored in Oracle. That's our ERP. Epic is our EMR, and Snowflake is our cloud data warehouse, but most importantly, Databricks. That is who's going to enable us with AI. So most important is Databricks. All right. So our problem, it's the Wild Wild West. The current landscape, right? This is before Unity Catalog. We have 131 unique workspaces across 10 different subscriptions, right? And each workspace was project specific. So every single team is just doing their own thing, and there is their own pipeline and their own data source, data destination, and workflows. And it's just really difficult for the org to manage 131 unique workspaces across 10 different subscriptions. So our leadership looked to us to build out best practices and provide guidelines and guardrails for the Databricks landscape. And also, this is a great opportunity to optimize and to work across different teams outside of healthcare intelligence. This was our team. So our team consisted of a cross-functional group, everyone bringing in their own expertise from their area. We are from healthcare intelligence. Again, we are the enterprise data team. We also included folks from the cloud infrastructure. They owned the Azure cloud across the tenant. They own the policies and the infrastructure for the tenant. And we are one subscriber to that tenant. We also included cybersecurity. We have to. We're in healthcare. Everything has to be approved and blessed by them. Networking in the firewall team. Since we were restructuring the landscape, networking have to fix route tables, and we have to set up firewalls to get things monitored. And of course, our other most important team member is our Databricks vendor. Dan is not here, but Rebecca is here. Rebecca, please stand up, turn around. Thank you. We love you. All right. So how we got started, I'm so sorry, my notes are all over the place. So, 1 second, oh my gosh. So we had 4 week-long sessions, and it spanned about the last 3 months of 2023. These were not sessions where we just sat with our laptops. These were literally 8-hour-long, in-person focused session. We're in the same room, we were whiteboarding, we were solutioning, and we actually like tested out dev deployment, like launched stuff in dev. And the biggest thing here was that we got questions answered in Roblox. Instead of just emailing someone, waiting for a response, we had the cyber security folks call someone else up. We call someone on networking or firewall, and then they were able to like remove barriers. The other call out is no managers were involved. It was just us architects and the button pushers. So that was the most important thing, right? So they said, let the architects architect, and that's what we did. We architected.
Anna, you mean the MVP,
yes.
not the button pusher. Right? Yeah.
MVP. So before COVID, we were a hybrid team, but after COVID, we're probably like most of you, we were fully remote. And it's just great just getting back in together in person and having like a goal that we're trying to accomplish. So what else happened? Oh yeah, so yes, these were long, grueling days, and there were roadblocks that took a little longer to remove, and what better way to celebrate than like over drinks and food, right? Yes, it may seem insignificant, but don't overlook it, because let me remind you that this is like the first time some of us are meeting face-to-face in person. So we're still like forming as a team, and that I can't reiterate how important that is, right? Also, here's the best part. Once you build the rapport and establish that relationship, you take that to the next project. So there's another project we're working on right now, and I'm like, oh, that guy, he was good. He was good in UC. I'm gonna hit him up for my current project. So that was the good stuff that came out of it. Okay, infrastructure. So as you all know, or as maybe some of you guys know and some of you guys don't know, healthcare is highly, highly regulated. And in the old landscape, out of the 131 workspaces, each project team was deploying their own workspace, spinning up their own clusters, and just managing their own source and pipelines and repos, right? So we had to shore up the infrastructure, and what we did was we created 3 workspaces, one for dev, one for test, and one for prod. And we stuck these 3 workspaces in one single central subscription that was managed by cloud infrastructure. They are the tenant owners. So instead of sitting in these random subscriptions everywhere, it's just in the main subscription owned by the tenant managers, and that was the best part of it, right? So let's see what else. We also work with networking to route the traffic to the new workspaces. We set up the firewall to monitor traffic. And then we also did other prep work with every single project team. Those prep work include updating their code repo to make it into the same repo. We use Git. And we also updated any old clusters that had old runtime, because if some of the UC had limitations, they needed updated runtime. And also projects that have data stored in a single location, we had them all moved to ADLS. So it's a central data store. And on top of that, when we were meeting with each project team, we were gathering information on their pipelines. And by that, we were able to build patterns. And with patterns, we ultimately ended up having those policies in place. That's what helped us build policies, was we were identifying patterns. And last but not least, we had a data architecture meet with every single project team to kind of get to know how they're storing their data so that he can recommend a hierarchy on how to organize their data in Unity Catalog. So those are all prep work, even before we went and we migrated. That was all the prep work. And Janet's gonna talk more about the good stuff here. So don't zone out.
Thanks, Anna. So hopefully we're all familiar with Unity Catalog. This is a high-level overview of kind of what we're doing. So Unity Catalog, as Anna mentioned, we did a really big current state assessment. We had a ton of workspaces. It was a bit overwhelming. We really focused on the HI ones and looked at what kinds of things we're doing, and we tried to look at how we can consolidate. Providence is a really big organization with a lot of analytics and data scientists all over the organization. And we want to really enable them to do their work. We don't want to be a roadblock for that. So we needed to be able to provide data catalogs for different teams so they can manage and deploy and do their own things. But what we did is we went from 131 workspaces and tried to look, how do we build data catalogs by teams that can kind of manage their own data? Healthcare intelligence provides foundational data. So we want to make sure that that's data that's all centralized and in a place where we can share it with everybody. And some of the teams manage their own data and aren't ready to share that. So with Unity Catalog, it was really powerful because we took that data out of the individual workspaces, centralized it, and reorganized it. Like Anna mentioned, we have a data architect really highly engaged. As we go through this process of migrating, everybody wants their own data catalog. They want it to look like the old workspaces. And so it's a bit of education, but it's also a bit of nudging to say, you don't need your own data catalog. We can all share a space in healthcare intelligence, for example, and make sure that we're providing this really important, powerful data, but also providing naming conventions around schemas and tables so that it's easier to find with Unity Catalog now. Before, things were named kind of cryptic. With Unity Catalog, there's system tables. That's been super helpful for us because before we didn't have visibility into the old workspaces. Now we can pull data around clusters, usage, metadata, and some other helpful information to help us with planning. And so system tables has been really helpful for us. We have the 3 workspaces, as Anna mentioned. We have one for production, one for test, and one for dev. This was hugely powerful. Might not seem like it, but by centralizing, now that we have our data decoupled from our code, we actually have CI/CD pipelines, whereas before everything was in production even though it was dev. So that's been hugely awesome. And we've also made it so that we can share our data more easily. We're making sure data is not in DBFS or not stored somewhere else, but all centralized in our data lake. So as part of Data Catalog, Unity Catalog, and this whole migration and this decision by our IS partners to centralize and centrally manage subscriptions, we've seen a lot of benefits and there's been a huge impact. And so as Anna mentioned, this is not a lift and shift. We got told, you could turn this on in a minute. And we decided with our leadership support, we're not doing that. We're gonna really look at the current landscape that we have and say, we really wanna set a foundation so we can more easily enable AI features and other things in the future and continue to build upon it. So we're doing a really large cleanup and changing some behaviors and practices and consolidation and adopting best practices. So that we're reducing our workspaces from 131 to 3. We're centralizing it, makes it easier for us to make sure we're centralizing our data, we're deduplicating it, reducing data hops. We found a lot of duplicate data through this process. We also found inefficient patterns where we were unnecessarily copying data. We're removing things that are no longer serving a use, so things that are low usage. One of the really key things around centralizing and with Unity Catalog, instead of having 131 workspaces to push out policies and try to manage things, we can now do this in the centrally managed subscriptions. And so we're building cluster policies as well as other policies to make sure that we're really providing that governance that's really important. Having these centralized and having the 3 workspaces makes it easier for us to do infrastructure as a code now, which is a big focus for Providence. And as I mentioned, CI/CD. And it's easier for us now to enable lifecycle management. We can remove things that aren't used anymore, I think, in an easier way. And we're very focused on cost and usage reporting. So by now having these centralized, whereas before I had to pull things from many subscriptions and join them together, and I won't share how much work that was. Now I can pull it from 1 or 2 subscriptions and about 6 different resource groups, and it's so much easier to pull the data together. And as I mentioned, this is laying the foundation for us to enable lots of new features. We're very excited about where Databricks is going.
And it's like how Buzz tells Woody, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And this is probably like the 5th time we said it. This is a migration, not a lift and shift, okay? Because if we just simply turn UC on, yes, we can do that. It'll still be the wild, wild west. It'll still be 131 workspaces, right? So we're also changing like project teams' workflows and behavior. And you know that's gonna take time, right? It's tedious, but it's worth it. And the thing is, our leadership was in alignment, so that played a big key role in it. You gotta get your leadership to align with this, right? And the timeline, and know that it's gonna take time because you're changing behavior. We started the migration journey in January of 2024, and it's still a work in progress. Out of the 131 workspaces that we owned, that Healthcare Intelligence owned, we are about 63% migrated over to the central subscription and the central workspaces. And the ones out of the 131 that were not owned by HI were about 60% migrated over to UC. And any new work, any new project team that wants to work with Databricks and in the Databricks workspace, we enabled them in the new UC-enabled workspaces, the central ones. So that's a good call. And we have onboarded 20 plus different teams as of today. So that's, yay, go team.
Yeah. So Anna mentioned earlier, as part of the current state assessment, we looked at what kind of data processing we're doing. We came up with what we're calling design patterns. These are high level and conceptual. These are not the things we bring to InfoSec necessarily to get security approval. What this did is it really provided visibility across many IS teams of the types of things we're doing. Before, healthcare intelligence and data was a bit of a black box to our partners in cloud infrastructure, security, networking, and other IS teams. And it made it kind of hard to work together because we had to explain every individual use case and all that. So what we did is we came up with 7 high-level patterns, and this helped to provide that visibility and allowed us to have really good conversations with Databricks and our partners to talk about what kind of guardrails do we want to put in place? How do we need to secure and govern this? Here's an example of one for machine learning. So we have all kinds of data sources we can pull from. That's not changing. We have stuff in our data lake, our Delta Lake, and our cloud data warehouse. And what we found is with machine learning, we found some of our machine learning cluster work was extremely expensive and some wasn't. We wanted to dig in and find out why. What we found is we have developers that were doing a lot of just discovery of data using really large interactive clusters. And so we could look at changing that behavior and recommending that they use, for example, Databricks SQL or our Snowflake to do that work instead. 80% of the work in data science seems like it's prep and just discovery of your feature set and putting data together. So doing that with lower costs was one thing that we could recommend. We also found we had a lot of stuff happening around machine learning where we were only using interactive clusters. We have a high percentage of interactive clusters at Providence right now. That might change over time. And we had a very low percentage of job clusters. So as we looked into that, we found that developers love the interactive clusters, and they were actually scheduling them. So what we wanted to do is help change behaviors to say, for interactive clusters, do all your development there, but as soon as you're ready to run something big or schedule it, it needs to be a job cluster, which can be 1/5 of the cost. And we were deploying as batch. This pattern allowed us also to look at serverless model serving. We're now looking towards deploying as APIs. So these patterns just help us to keep all the teams aware of what types of things we're doing, be on the same page, and prepare for new features as well. As we looked at our current landscape of all those many clusters and the type of work we had, we found that with Databricks, there was quite a bit of experimental or learning or POC work. That's awesome. We want to enable that. But as we thought about it kind of high level where we want to put in policies or guardrails, that's where we want most of them. We wanted to have more things so we weren't accidentally overspending or over-consuming resources on this experimental work. And probably the least amount of guardrails where it's something that really is production. It's tried out, we know how many clusters it needs, we know what size it needs, and it's something that's operational. So we kind of looked at our current landscape of how many things are really production versus how many things are experimental. And as I mentioned before, everything was mostly in a production environment, so we had to really analyze it in detail. And then we came up with what kind of guardrails we want. Since most of our stuff is interactive and job clusters, we started there, but we're also looking at Delta Live and other types of cluster SKUs. Some of the types of cluster guardrails that we put in place is things like having, a default cluster size, a lower size VM with fewer nodes, maybe 30 minutes or less as the auto terminate. We found a lot of folks were putting 0 as the auto terminate, which means unlimited, which wasn't good. Or they had 5,000 minutes. So by just setting that as a default, that in itself was kind of nice. We also made it so we're restricting scheduling of interactive clusters. We can no longer do that. We have to run them as we're developing. And we made it in our production workspace where we can't have an interactive cluster anymore. If it's in a production workspace, it shouldn't be interactive. Some other types of guardrails that we've put in place, we really want to encourage any new work in Unity Catalog. So what we've done is we've said no new workspaces in those old subscriptions that are managed by different teams. Anything that we're building now needs to be done through Unity Catalog. We're also making it so any new features with Databricks go through Unity Catalog. So even though they may not be fully dependent on it, Providence is making the decision to say, you need to be in Unity Catalog if we want to use these new AI features. That's been awesome to help us adopt Unity Catalog. Really important to our partners in IS is the ability to opt into new features. Being highly regulated, we want to make sure we're denying preview items. They're not covered under our BAA. And so we want to make sure the GA features are the ones that people can use, but that we're also vetting them in advance and making sure we understand the pattern and it's part of our InfoSec approval. Since we're centralizing and centrally managed resource groups, centrally managed workspaces, we had to think about how can we really look at cost and usage. So another thing we're using our policies for is to reinforce tagging. We have one workspace per project in the past, so I could kind of generally see, though not easily, like what the cost was for different types of work. And now we have one for prod, test, and dev. And so what we wanted to do is set up these policies. We have interactive cluster policies, job cluster policies, Delta Live table policies, and they're also set up by groups. So the groups lets us auto default, in many cases, what these tags will be, the values. And then in other cases like healthcare intelligence where we do all kinds of things, we have a set list of things that can be typed in or a set list of values. We're no longer allowing free text because in the past we had a lot of issues with being able to use tags for reporting. So some of the key ones that we came up with is understanding business customer. This was important for understanding value. This isn't something we thought about before. As I talked to different developers and surveyed the current landscape, in many cases it said, this is work for us. But like, who benefits from this? Who benefits from this forecasting model downstream? That's what we want to capture there. And it helps us understand where are we really making an impact in the organization. The business effort, we really are working towards some governance around making sure we have friendly names in that. So if I pull a report together, I know what is our streaming data platform costs versus some of my machine learning project costs. In the past, these were cryptic and acronyms that nobody could remember. So it was really hard to figure out, what are these? What's in here? Since we had workspaces that had, users and data in them, we were doing 3 or 4 different kinds of things there. Now with Unity Catalog, we can have tags to look at our machine learning costs versus our ingest costs versus our data transformation costs. That's been really powerful. We're looking at project state. This isn't fully implemented, but we want to know what is more experimental or POC, so we can use lifecycle management on that, versus what is something that we really have a key business partner engaged in. It's in development or in production. We want to be able to know who's the contact for our telemetry processes if something goes awry. And then on the team owner side, because we're a large organization, we have all kinds of teams working in Databricks, which is really cool. We want to be able to understand cost and usage and other metrics on who manages those different workflows. A big focus from this past year in 2023 was cloud value optimization. We had a goal around that in healthcare intelligence. This was not focused just on reducing costs, or I would say it wasn't about reducing costs. It was making sure that we were getting value out of our cloud platforms. Databricks was actually awesome in this way because we got really good data and we could really find optimization and savings opportunities. So for Databricks this past year, we saved around $420,000. We partnered really closely with Databricks as well as Microsoft to understand total cost of ownership. We didn't have visibility into this before this. So total cost of ownership includes the DBU cost, which is the Databricks units, as well as on our Azure side, support costs and influence costs. I'll go more into this later. We reviewed our high-cost workspaces. We wanted to understand what value are these things providing. We had some pretty expensive processing happening. We wanted to understand who's using this, and we have research teams using data and all kinds of things happening. We wanted to understand where is the value in this. We asked some hard questions that were a little uncomfortable, and I think that helped us get to a point where we understood where are our high-value things. We looked at where we could collaborate with Databricks and our IS partners to provide those patterns I mentioned earlier so we could identify behavior changes. We did some visibility by doing showbacks. We went with our top, most expensive spend. And by just providing visibility, that changed behavior. Some of our data scientists didn't realize how much stuff was costing. And so I think by having that visibility, they changed some of their behavior and costs immediately dropped. That was really interesting. In some cases that didn't happen, but in some cases it did. And we identified things that were no longer serving a purpose or had low value at this time. Maybe they were really valuable 2 years ago, but now we were doing it in a different way. So we could turn off that compute and no longer incur costs there. Or we could move the stuff from storage to archive it. We focused a lot on optimization. We had a big focus around changing our timeouts, as I mentioned, making sure they were lower numbers, as well as right-sizing of VMs. We optimized some of our key processes. We have Clarity, which is our Epic electronic medical record data that we ingest to our data lake daily using Databricks. We have a de-identification of notes. It's like an NLP process, which was pretty pricey. And then we also have a Truveta trucking service. Truveta is a partner of ours that we and other healthcare providers send data to, and they serve it up for life sciences companies. So we send data to them daily. We had a huge focus on these and many other processes to see where can we really save more? Where can we optimize? And we remove things that are no longer used. We had a really high number of workspaces and clusters that just really weren't used. We use this data now to better help inform our future Databricks commit and our P3 reservations. We're much more informed now on what are things costing, as well as what do we expect things to cost more. We know we're moving more into the AI space with deep learning and other things. We're trying to help prepare for that. We're continuing to focus on optimization in this year. So as part of our migration, we continue to look at right-sizing VMs, optimizing workflows, changing behaviors, turning off things that aren't providing value. And we have a really big focus on interactive versus job clusters. So like I mentioned before, we put in some policies to restrict scheduling interactive clusters. This is in place in our Unity Catalog spaces. So as people move over, we're changing behaviors. The interactive clusters can cost up to 5 times the amount of a job cluster. And we're working on, as I mentioned, just making sure we're using those for development only. For our Databricks total cost of ownership, whenever a cluster is running, it incurs additional compute and other resources, or VM and other resources on our Azure side. So whenever a cluster is running, we incur Databricks units, which is the Databricks spend, our Azure support costs, and Azure influence. We go to the Azure portal for the big picture on this, and we also extract this data, and we have a whole database that a team maintains that we do all kinds of reporting on. We have our centrally managed subscription in this example with 2 resource groups. So each of our workspaces will have 2 resource groups. One is the non-managed resource group, and that includes Databricks, as well as some other Azure support resources and costs. And then we have our managed resource groups, and this includes primarily the VMs, but it's our Databricks influence costs. So as we looked at piecing all this together, especially for the 131 legacy, it was really hard to do this across all the different subscriptions, because even just the way resource groups were named, we didn't know which ones were the managed resource groups, for the VM costs. But what we've done now is having our tagging, as well as having the ability to understand this total cost of ownership, we can really slice and dice and get really good data on our costs. This is synthetic data that I'm showing here, but in this case, we have our Databricks cost spend, which was around 60% of the cost, and our VMs in this case were 30%. What we found with our different patterns is we had different percentages there, so that also helped inform us, just kind of understand spend and better predict. For cost optimization, another area of focus has been on right-sizing VMs. So we had to pull this data from our Azure portal APIs. The VMs are on our side. They're in our Azure cloud. We're not on serverless that much yet, so this will change when we're on serverless. But we extract it daily and we create a report. Here's an example of a VM that has less than 1% CPU percentage utilized. That's not good. This isn't necessarily a direct reflection of something that needs to change, but at least we can go engage the project team and say, hey, help me understand what's happening here. It usually meant we needed to change timeouts or reduce the size of the VM. For Unity Catalog, another big key area for us is system tables. It's providing some really awesome usage and other data. We're excited about where it's going. So it allows us to report on both the non-Unity Catalog as well as the Unity Catalog workspaces, how we're using it currently. We use it to identify clusters with large timeouts. We can pull cluster level details to understand specific jobs and how many DBUs are being consumed. We look at things by the type of cluster or SKU and understand, again, our DBU spend there. And we're using it to track user activity.
And it's both. You should follow the data, and you should use some of your instinct.
Yes, yeah.
It's not an or, it's an and.
As we go to serverless, I think system tables will become even more important for us. So what about serverless? Where does that fit? I just saw the announcement yesterday that everything is serverless, so that's amazing, but that wasn't true when we started this journey. For us, serverless, we're really focusing on AI. We're very interested in enabling AI features right now. And we actually have a goal for this year as part of healthcare intelligence to advance AI-powered transformation. But because we're healthcare and there's a lot of forces at play, and we're highly regulated, it's not easy to necessarily move these forward. We want to be innovative, we want to empower and enable data insights, but we also need to make sure we're safe and secure, and we need to make sure that we're working closely with our other IS partners to provide those guardrails. So one of the areas that we've already enabled is serverless model serving, so we can take our machine learning models, deploy them as APIs, and we're working closely now to look at what is the next set of features we want to enable. As part of enabling the AI features, as I mentioned before, we partner really closely with Databricks, Dan and Rebecca, who are awesome, so that we can share what are we doing, what do we want to do, where are we going, and then they can share the upcoming features, and we can do really big technical deep dives to ask all the questions our different IS partners would want to know. We're really focused right now on enabling OpenAI. We're already using it, of course, but we have so many use cases coming. We're building a foundation and infrastructure with APIM kind of ahead of it so that we can serve this up and, I think, enable use cases even more easily. And we're really looking at the Databricks feature roadmap right now and staying up to date with that. We want to get better at planning quarterly features, be less reactive. We have a really finite, small number of resources that needs to closely coordinate to put all this together, and we want to use them wisely.
Thank you for staying this whole time and attending our presentation. Yeah.